The morning sun was just beginning to rise above the rolling hills of Willow Creek Valley, its golden light spilling across endless fields of wheat and corn. The farm, owned for generations by the Bennett family, stretched further than the eye could see. Horses stirred in the stables, chickens clucked in the yard, and the smell of damp earth still lingered from last night's rain. It was the kind of land where silence spoke louder than words, and the rhythm of life was dictated by the soil, the seasons, and the sweat of one's brow. Caleb Bennett, a rugged 32-year-old farmer, lived his life by those rhythms. His hands were rough, his shoulders broad, and his gaze often distant. Years of hard work had carved determination into his every movement, but beneath the hardened exterior lay a loneliness that even he refused to admit. His world revolved around the farm, and he had little interest in anything that existed beyond its fences. To him, people complicated things. The earth never lied, but people always seemed to. That morning, as he made his way down toward the river with a bundle of laundry, he caught sight of something unusual. The river was not just a place to draw water, it was tradition. Generations of Bennett women had once knelt at its edge, scrubbing clothes while gossiping or laughing together. Caleb's mother had done the same until her passing years ago. Since then, the task had fallen on him, though he hated it. He preferred the barn or the fields, not the delicate work of washing linen. But today, as he approached the riverbank, he stopped short. Someone was already there. Kneeling in the shallow water, her skirts hitched up slightly, was a young woman he had never seen before. She scrubbed a shirt against a stone, humming softly to herself. Strands of chestnut hair escaped her braid, catching the sunlight like threads of fire. She seemed out of place, her movements gentle, almost elegant, yet determined. Caleb frowned, his chest tightening with confusion and something else he couldn't name. "Hey." His voice was deep, edged with suspicion. "What are you doing on my land?" The woman startled, nearly dropping the shirt into the water. She turned, her wide hazel eyes locking with his. For a moment, she looked like a deer caught in the crossfire, uncertain whether to run or speak. I didn't know this belonged to someone," she said quickly, her accent hinting she wasn't from the valley. "The river looked clean. I needed water to wash. I'm sorry if I overstepped." Caleb crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. "This whole stretch belongs to the Bennett farm. People don't just wander here unless they're lost." She bit her lip, then lifted her chin with quiet defiance. "Then maybe I am lost." The answer threw him off guard. Most people in Willow Creek knew better than to test his temper, yet this stranger stood her ground. He studied her, taking in her clothes, simple, but not the rags of someone poor. Her hands bore calluses, yet her posture held grace. She wasn't from here, that much was clear. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Evelyn," she replied softly, wringing the shirt in her hands. Evelyn Hart. There was silence between them, broken only by the river's steady flow. Caleb wanted to tell her to leave, to stay away from his land, yet something about her presence unsettled him. She didn't belong here, and yet somehow she did. "I don't like strangers trespassing," he muttered, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "But you can finish what you started." Evelyn blinked, clearly surprised. "Thank you," he grunted in reply, dropping his own bundle of clothes near the water and kneeling a few feet away. For a while they worked in silence, each focused on their task, though both acutely aware of the other's presence. The river, once just a routine part of Caleb's day, now felt like the stage for something different, something he couldn't yet explain. And as the sun climbed higher, casting a golden glow over the rippling water, Caleb realized with a strange unease that his life, so predictable until now, had just shifted. Caleb had not meant to allow Evelyn to stay that morning, yet he hadn't found the strength to drive her away either. Something in her eyes, something fragile and hidden, had stirred a chord within him. Still, when he carried the freshly washed clothes back to the farmhouse, he told himself it was only courtesy. He wasn't a man to entertain strangers, especially not ones who appeared out of nowhere. But Evelyn did not disappear. The following day, when Caleb returned to the river, she was there again. The sight of her kneeling by the water, her hands working through the fabric with practiced care, struck him with a strange sense of inevitability, as if the river had called her, just as it had called generations of women before. "You're back," Caleb said gruffly, setting down his laundry. She glanced up, smiling faintly. I told you I might be lost. Lost people usually take time to find their way. He narrowed his eyes, though a corner of his mouth twitched against his will. Her words had a weight he couldn't quite understand. For 3 mornings in a row, Evelyn came. She was quiet, sometimes humming while she worked, sometimes asking simple questions about the valley or the farm. Caleb answered little, preferring silence, but he listened. The sound of her voice, light and yet threaded with something weary, began to carve its way into his day. And then one evening, at the tavern in town, whispers began. "Seen the girl by the river?" one of the townsfolk asked, leaning over his mug of ale. "Doesn't belong here. Says she's just passing through, but no one really knows." Another man smirked. "Pretty thing, though. Wouldn't mind her washing clothes at my place." Caleb, seated at the far end of the bar, stiffened at the remark. His reputation as the rough, no-nonsense farmer kept most men from testing him. But even so, the conversation left an unpleasant taste in his mouth. Evelyn wasn't theirs to gossip about. She wasn't anyone's. When he returned home that night, the memory of her face at the river haunted him more than he cared to admit. The next morning, Evelyn was slower than usual with her work. She seemed distracted, her hands lingering too long on the fabric, her gaze drifting toward the forest beyond the water. Caleb noticed immediately. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his tone gentler than usual. Evelyn hesitated, then sighed. "You're not the first to ask where I come from, and I suppose you won't be the last. But the truth is, I don't want to go back." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Caleb turned to look at her more closely, noticing how tightly she gripped the damp cloth in her hands. "Did someone hurt you?" His question was blunt, but beneath it was something else, concern he couldn't quite mask. Evelyn lowered her gaze, the river's reflection shimmering in her hazel eyes. "Not in the way you think, but yes. Life can hurt, even without a hand being raised." Caleb's chest tightened. He wanted to ask more, to press her for answers, but the words died on his tongue. He was not a man who pried into other secrets. He had his own buried deep beneath years of silence. Instead, he said quietly, "The farm's big. If you need a place to stay, there's room. I don't offer this often, but if you're running from something, you can stop here." Evelyn turned toward him, her eyes widening. For a moment, she looked as though she might refuse, then slowly she nodded. "I'll help then," she said softly. "With the washing, with whatever else you need. I don't take kindness for free." Caleb gave a short nod, though inside his thoughts churned. He hadn't expected to make such an offer. He hadn't expected to care whether she stayed or left. And yet, when she smiled faintly at him, it was as if the walls he had built around his heart cracked just a little. That night, as Evelyn settled into the small spare room upstairs, Caleb stood by the window, staring out at the moonlit fields. Something was changing, something he could not name, and it terrified him, because Caleb Bennett had sworn long ago never to let anyone close again. And Evelyn Hart, the stranger by the river, was already closer than anyone had been in years. Days turned into weeks, and Evelyn's presence on the Bennett farm grew less like an intrusion and more like a quiet rhythm. She rose early, worked beside Caleb in silence, and filled the once empty farmhouse with small signs of life. A vase of wildflowers on the table, the faint hum of her voice drifting through the kitchen window, the sound of footsteps on the creaking stairs at night. Caleb noticed the changes, though he rarely spoke of them. He told himself he tolerated her because she worked hard, because she carried her weight without complaint, but deep down he knew the truth was different. The farm no longer felt like a place of solitude. It felt alive, and he hadn't realized until now how desperately he'd needed that. Yet the more she settled in, the more Caleb's curiosity grew. Who was Evelyn Hart really? One evening, a storm rolled across Willow Creek Valley. The sky cracked open with lightning, and rain lashed against the farmhouse windows. Caleb was mending a broken harness by the fire when Evelyn came downstairs, wrapped in a shawl. Her face was pale, her hands trembling ever so slightly. "You all right?" Caleb asked, setting aside his tools. "I've never liked storms," she admitted, her voice quiet. "They remind me of things I'd rather forget." He studied her in the flickering firelight. There it was again, that shadow in her eyes, that weight she carried but never spoke of. "You don't have to tell me," he said after a pause, "but hiding from it won't make it go away." Her lips curved into a bitter smile. "And what about you, Caleb Bennett? What are you hiding from?" The question hit him harder than he expected. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He wasn't used to being seen so clearly. No one in town dared pry into his life, not since tragedy had turned him into the silent, brooding figure they now knew. But Evelyn had asked without fear, as if she saw straight through his defenses. Some things, he said finally, his voice low, are better left buried. Evelyn's gaze lingered on him, searching for something he wasn't ready to give. Then, she nodded and returned her eyes to the storm outside. Later that night, when the thunder faded and the rain softened, Caleb found himself standing at the doorway to her room. He didn't knock, he only listened, hearing the faint sound of her sobs, muffled by the pillow. It twisted something deep inside him. He could handle broken fences, sick horses, even the crushing weight of debt that hung over the farm, but not this. Not the sound of Evelyn Hart crying in the dark. The next morning she was different. She smiled at him in the kitchen, cheerful as though the night before had never happened. She kneaded dough for bread, humming softly, and for a moment, Caleb wondered if he had imagined her sorrow. But as the day wore on, he noticed the truth behind her practiced ease, the way her hands shook slightly, the way her laughter came too quickly, too forced. At the river, she finally broke the silence. "Do you believe," she asked suddenly, "that a person can start over completely? Leave everything behind and never look back?" Caleb paused, the water running cool over his hands. "If anyone knows about leaving things behind," he said slowly, "it's me. But no matter how far you run, the past has a way of following." Evelyn's expression faltered, her eyes flashing with a mix of fear and defiance. "Then I'll run faster," she whispered. Before Caleb could respond, a figure appeared on the ridge above them. A man on horseback, watching from a distance. His hat shadowed his face, but even from afar, Caleb could see the way the stranger's eyes fixed on Evelyn. She froze, the color drained from her cheeks. Without a word, the rider turned his horse and disappeared down the hill, but the damage was done. Evelyn's hands shook violently as she clutched the damp fabric to her chest. "Who was that?" Caleb asked, his voice hard. Her lips parted, but no answer came. Instead, tears welled in her eyes, and she turned away from him. And in that moment, Caleb understood something he had been resisting since the day he met her. Evelyn Hart was not simply lost. She was running from something or someone, and now whoever it was had found her. The days after the rider's appearance weighed heavy on the farm. Evelyn worked harder than ever, throwing herself into chores as if the blisters on her hands could erase the fear in her heart. She smiled when Caleb looked at her, but the smiles never reached her eyes. Caleb saw everything. He saw how she startled at distant hoofbeats, how she lingered near the farmhouse windows at night, as though expecting someone to emerge from the darkness. And he hated it, the way fear had crept into her, threatening to steal the fragile peace she had found here. Finally, one evening, Caleb broke the silence. Who was he? His voice was calm but unyielding. Evelyn sat down the pail she was carrying, her shoulders stiffening. For a long moment she said nothing. Then quietly she whispered, "My past." They sat by the fire that night, the air thick with unspoken truths. Evelyn's hands twisted in her lap as she gathered the courage to speak. "I wasn't born Evelyn Hart," she admitted. "That name is mine now, but it wasn't the one given to me. I grew up in the city. My father was a wealthy man, controlling, ruthless, and he promised me." Her voice trembled. "He promised me to someone I didn't love, a man who wanted more than just me. He wanted the fortune tied to my family's name." Caleb's jaw tightened. He had seen plenty of men in his life who treated women like possessions, but the fury that rose in him now was different. It was personal. "So you ran," he said, his eyes fixed on her. Evelyn nodded, tears glistening in the firelight. "I thought if I came far enough, if I made myself small and ordinary, they would stop looking. But that man on the horse, I know him. He works for the one I left behind." Her voice cracked, and she pressed her hands against her face. "He's found me, Caleb. He'll tell them where I am." And then, she broke off, her shoulders shaking. Caleb reached forward, his rough hand covering hers. She flinched at first, then stilled, meeting his gaze. "No one is taking you from this farm," he said, his voice low and steady. "Not while I stand here." Evelyn's breath caught. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of safety, not because her past had vanished, but because Caleb Bennett had spoken the words as though they were carved into stone. But the valley had ears, and news traveled faster than either of them expected. At the tavern a few nights later, Caleb heard whispers again. "They say there's a stranger asking questions in town," one man muttered over his drink. "Looking for a woman. Pretty thing with hair like fire, pays well for answers." Another chuckled. "If she's hiding, she won't be for long. Money always loosens lips." Caleb left before the conversation finished, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. When he returned to the farm, Evelyn was at the river. The moon hung low, casting silver across the rippling water. She looked up when she saw him, her expression weary. "I can't stay, Caleb," she said before he could speak. Her voice was soft but resolute. "If I remain, I'll bring danger to you, to your land, to everything you've built." He stepped closer, the river rushing between them. "And where will you go? Back to the city? Back to the man who hunts you?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Caleb's voice dropped, filled with a rare urgency. "You don't understand, Evelyn. Since the day you walked into this river, I haven't been able to imagine this place without you. If you go, the silence will return, and I—" He stopped, his chest tightening. He had never admitted such things aloud, not even to himself. Evelyn's eyes shone with tears. "And if I stay, you could lose everything, even your life." For a long moment, the only sound was the rushing of the river, two souls caught between the weight of the past and the fragile hope of something new. Then from the woods came the sharp crack of a branch snapping underfoot. Both turned sharply. The shadows moved. Someone was watching. The sound of the snapped branch sent a chill racing down Evelyn's spine. She clutched Caleb's arm instinctively, her breath quickening. Caleb moved in front of her, his body a shield, his gaze fixed on the trees. "Show yourself," he barked, his voice echoing across the valley. Silence. Only the rustling of leaves answered. But Caleb knew what he'd seen. Shadows shifting in the undergrowth, eyes fixed on them from the darkness. Whoever had come was skilled at hiding, skilled at waiting. He pulled Evelyn toward the farmhouse, his grip firm. "Inside," he commanded. Back within the safety of the wooden walls, Caleb lit the lanterns and locked the doors. Evelyn trembled, her face pale. "It's him, Caleb. I know it. He's here." Caleb knelt in front of her, steadying her with his hands on her shoulders. "Look at me. Whoever's out there, they're not taking you. Not from me. Not from this place." Her eyes filled with tears. "Why would you risk everything for me?" Caleb's voice softened, breaking past the layers of silence he'd built over the years. "Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being a stranger. You became mine." The confession hung heavy in the air, as though spoken into eternity. Evelyn's lips trembled, but before she could respond, a knock thundered against the door. 3 sharp raps. Both of them froze. Caleb rose, every muscle in his body coiled. "Stay behind me," he whispered. He opened the door just enough to see the figure outside. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "Evening, Bennett," the man drawled. His voice was smooth, dangerous. "I've been looking for someone. Maybe you've seen her." Caleb's eyes hardened. "You're trespassing." The man smirked. "Oh, I'm not here for land. I'm here for a woman. Red hair, hazel eyes. Calls herself Evelyn these days." Behind Caleb, Evelyn gasped. The man tilted his head, his smile widening at the sound. "Ah, so she is here." Caleb stepped fully into the doorway, blocking the view inside. "You'd best turn your horse around before this becomes something you regret." The man chuckled low. "You think you can stand in the way of men like us, farmer? She belongs to Mr. Blackwell, and he always gets what's his." The name made Evelyn's knees buckle. Caleb caught her hand behind him, squeezing firmly as if to say, "Not here, not now." The stranger tipped his hat. "We'll be back." And with that, he vanished into the storm, the sound of hooves fading into the night. Evelyn collapsed into a chair, tears spilling freely. "It's over, Caleb. They'll come with more men. You can't fight them. Please, you have to let me go." Caleb knelt before her again, fire burning in his eyes. "I've lost too much in my life to watch you walk away. Now, if they want to fight, they'll get one. But you are not leaving." She stared at him, her heart pounding. No one had ever stood for her this way. No one had ever chosen her over safety, over reason. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying and beautiful. She loved him. The following days were restless. Caleb prepared as though war were coming. He reinforced the doors, checked the rifles his father had left behind, and rode the boundaries of the farm each dawn. Evelyn worked beside him, though her fear never left her eyes. And then one evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, smoke rose from the barn. Caleb sprinted toward it, shouting for water, but the flames roared too quickly, licking the night sky. Horses neighed in terror, and Evelyn ran to open the gates, releasing them before the fire consumed the stalls. Caleb fought the flames until his arms ached, but it was useless. The barn was gone, and in the chaos, one truth struck him harder than the fire itself. The blaze had not started by accident. Someone had set it. As the ashes smoldered, Evelyn clung to Caleb, her tears staining his soot-covered shirt. "They'll burn it all," she whispered. "They'll destroy everything until I have no choice but to go back." Caleb held her tighter, rage boiling in his veins. "No, they've made their mistake. They've brought their war to my land, and I don't care who this Blackwell thinks he is. I'll bury him before I let him take you." The moon hung over the valley like a silent witness as Caleb Bennett, once just a quiet, rugged farmer, prepared for the fight of his life. And Evelyn knew, as surely as the river flowed, that nothing would ever be the same again. The ashes of the barn still smoldered when dawn broke over Willow Creek. Smoke curled into the pale sky, a grim reminder that the war had already begun. Caleb stood at the edge of the fields, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his jaw set like stone. He was no longer a farmer waiting for the seasons. He was a man guarding what was his. Inside the farmhouse, Evelyn folded the few clothes she owned into a small satchel. Her hands trembled with every movement. She told herself she was doing the right thing. If she left now, Blackwell's men would follow her, and Caleb could rebuild in peace. But every step toward the door felt like dragging her heart across broken glass. When Caleb walked in and saw her, the satchel in her hand, his expression darkened. "You're not leaving," he said flatly. "Caleb, please." "No." His voice cracked like thunder. "I lost my father to this land. I lost my mother to sickness. I lost years of my life to silence. But I won't lose you." Tears blurred her vision. "And if you die for me, what then? What good is my love if it costs your life?" He stepped closer, his rough hand brushing against her cheek. His voice dropped, raw and unguarded. "Then at least I'll die knowing I finally fought for something worth more than this farm, worth more than me." Her heart broke open at his words, and in that moment, she understood there was no running anymore. Not for him, not for her. That night they came. For riders, their torches glowing like devil's eyes in the darkness. The clatter of hooves echoed through the valley as they dismounted at the farmhouse gate. Leading them was the man from before, his grin sharp beneath the brim of his hat. "Bennett," he called, his voice dripping with menace. "We've come for the girl. Hand her over, and maybe we'll let your house stand." Caleb stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Evelyn stood behind him, clutching the wooden railing, her fear written plain across her face. "You'll leave this land now," Caleb said, steady and cold, "or you'll be fertilizer for my fields." The men laughed, the sound cruel and mocking. Then steel flashed as they drew their guns. The night erupted. Gunfire cracked through the air, splinters flying from the porch as Caleb fired back. Evelyn screamed his name, ducking as bullets shattered the window behind her. Caleb struck one rider clean off his feet, but the others closed in fast. Heart racing, Evelyn ran inside, searching desperately. Her eyes landed on Caleb's father's old revolver, hidden beneath the cabinet. Her hands shook violently as she loaded it, but when she stepped back onto the porch, something fierce blazed in her chest. One of the men had Caleb pinned against the railing, his knife glinting in the torchlight. Without thinking, Evelyn raised the gun and fired. The man dropped instantly. Silence fell for the briefest moment as smoke curled from the barrel in her hands. Evelyn stood trembling, but her eyes burned with something new, defiance. The remaining riders exchanged wary glances. Their leader spat on the ground, glaring at Caleb. "This ain't over. Blackwell will come himself next time." He whistled sharply, and the men mounted their horses, retreating into the darkness. The sound of their departure lingered like a curse on the wind. When the dust settled, Caleb turned to Evelyn. She was shaking, the revolver slipping from her hands as sobs tore through her. He caught her, pulling her against his chest, holding her as if letting go would mean losing her forever. "You saved me," he murmured into her hair. "No," she wept, clutching him tighter. "You saved me first." The weeks that followed were not easy. The barn was gone, and the farm bore the scars of violence. Yet for the first time in years, Caleb didn't carry the weight alone. Evelyn worked beside him, her laughter slowly returning, her strength blossoming in the safety of his arms. Word spread through the valley about the night of the fire, about Caleb Bennett standing against Blackwell's men. Some said he was reckless, others called him a fool, but no one dared question the fire in his eyes, the way he now lived not just for the land, but for the woman who had brought life back to it. One evening as the sun sank low over the river, Caleb took Evelyn's hand. "This land has seen enough loss," he said softly. "It's time it sees love." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not born of fear. She nodded, smiling through them. And as they stood by the river, the place where it had all begun, the rough farmer and the runaway heart finally allowed themselves to believe in a future neither had thought possible.